Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Data Faces podcast. I'm David Sweenor, founder of Tiny Tech Guys, and your host for today's show. In this show, I talk with the people who are actually making data, analytics, AI, and marketing work in the real world. What's exciting, what's messy, and what's coming next. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Gina von Esmarch. She's founder and CEO of Adesso Associates. Gina's work really sits at the intersection of culture, storytelling, and technology. She helps brands bridge the gap between legacy and innovation. So in today's conversation, we're going to explore what happens when culture and technology collide. Do they compete, or can it actually enhance one another? And what can leaders do about building community and authenticity in a data-driven world? So let's dive in. Gina, welcome to the Data Faces podcast.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here and mixing it up a little bit, right? Talking about sort of bridging the gap between technology, culture, brand, and what that looks like. And for those people who don't know me, I am the founder of Adesso Associates. And as David shared perfectly, sort of focused on the intersection between culture and technology and helping organizations connect those strategic insights through authentic storytelling. So that's a bit about my background. And I think overall projects that have sort of inspired me over the last 25 plus years, of which, David, you've known me for a few of those, have really resonated in both high tech and then high tech sports marketing are some of the areas that I'm super passionate about, as well as community work.
Yeah, I've noticed on your LinkedIn, you have race cars, boats, and words about food. I think you have a blog you call Bowl Liquor that's listed on your LinkedIn. Can you tell us a little bit about how these things come together? Are they unlocking different parts of you as a person, and how are they related?
Great question. Yes, they are in fact unlocking different parts of the things that are of interest to me and have crossed my path either through work-related projects or otherwise. The blog it was definitely a passion project. Bowl Liquor is in fact the name because that's probably my favorite part of baking is that swipe of the bowl at the end there. But that was also kind of a proving ground for me, a proving ground of how to mix my passions, which were, career-wise always in technology, but passion-wise always in like food and trying to make the connection between that and maybe visual storytelling types of techniques. And through that, I've done some fun projects from America's Cup work to Formula One work, and then to writing a cookbook. So things that inspire me outside of my everyday life at the office.
That's amazing. And it's a fine cookbook. I made many of the recipes there. So I remember we traded one. So we've seen a few of these technology cycles, Gina, and right now we're in the Gen AI mania, I guess is how we could phrase it.
Right.
Throughout these cycles, how have you seen, your traditional role? How has that changed? How has it changed sort of, how work, maybe used to get done, and how is it get done today?
I think it's a great opportunity. AI as an example of like the technology, that's most top of mind, I think, for everybody right now is, definitely has that feeling of being very future forward, and can in fact help us, I think, in many ways where collaboration is an opportunity, or, brainstorming, but maybe brainstorming things initially with your, whatever your platform is, and then trying to infuse what as perhaps the main or core tenets of a particular topic or project or thing that you're doing. And I think a lot of times these things bridge the work, whether it's tech work or other work, enterprise side or organizational side, are sort of the same principles, but the fun and the challenge is really trying to get those to fuse together. And so, I think that it's sometimes a misconception that tech is the future and things that are of cultural relevance can be, looked at as in the past. One's fast, one's slower moving. And in fact, that's one of the intersections that I really like to stop and look at, because I think they both evolve in tandem. And Yeah, I don't know if that's something you want to explore more, but based on that work that I've done within the various communities, you see how AI, for example, in a community setting, I do a lot of work with the Italian American community in
Mhm.
the area, but you see how AI is actually not maybe eliminating anything. It's actually providing an opportunity for preserving, whether it's recipes like we just talked about, or
Sure.
mapping creation patterns, but really providing another layer of or another way to save or preserve or expand and amplify what what the organization could be looking to achieve.
Sure. So, I love this notion of, cultural heritage and technology. So, can maybe we can double click on what is that relationship between the two, and why is it important to, maintain or promote cultural heritage with technology?
Yeah, it's kind of a fun, it's a fun example to look at because what I really am passionate about is taking what we do in our everyday lives and
Mhm.
which is in the tech realm, right? And then taking those principles and applying it to a completely different business and seeing how it works. And I did that many years ago with the cookbook that I
Mhm.
wrote. I'd been consulting on how to grow your, social footprint. And in fact, I thought, well, this is an opportunity for me to actually try out and see if everything that I've done and told my clients about, I in fact works and how it works. And I'm relieved to say it did. It did work. It was a good model. But when you take something like this, in this one particular community project that I work on called the San Francisco Little Italy Honor Walk. It's basically an organization that looks at um, in sort of impressive contributors to the San Francisco landscape that are of Italian American heritage. And once these personalities are vetted, whether they're known like E.P. Giannini or like a woman, Dr. Mariana Bertola, you have the opportunity to, or the organization have the opportunity to put forward names, and then a plaque is created. And then in the heart of San Francisco's North Beach area, Little Italy, these plaques can be seen. But the reason I'm telling you this story is because I think there's a connection between how AI, for example, can turn storytelling into AI driven storytelling. And these plaques, while, which can be considered in many ways like not as techy or savvy as some things that
Mhm.
you would deploy in your regular campaigns would have have our bronze. They've got a little bit of a one or two sentence um, recap of an individual, which, by the way, is often honed down to the right word count through the use of
Mhm.
AI. And then it's etched, it's sent over. But on one of the corners, there's a barcode, and that barcode was sort of future built, right? And the future of
Right.
it is that you can scan this, you can get even more detail than what maybe you're reading on the plaque, of course. And then from there, you could potentially hear stories of an individual in their own voice or in some of their words in their memoirs. So I think you have the opportunity in this instance to use technology to amplify, preserve, and in no way dilute what that experience is. And it sort of takes it from our business sense, I'd say, from the premise of adoption of the technology just isn't enough, but you're actually able to get them to engage um, and have that technology reflect their identity as a brand or an organization is a win.
I love that notion that you have these plaques and you can scan it and get
Yeah.
more about the individual, perhaps in their own voice or other means. So that is super cool. It seems like the antithesis of, like, when we talk about AI, they said, well, we've trained it on the world's internet and everything is like average. So do
Mhm.
you see, like, AI, do you think it has the potential to erode or enhance, cultural identity? Which way do you see it? You see it going?
Well, I think it depends on how it's trained and how it's used. So I think the possibility is that it will enhance. I think, you know, it has, I think it's where you have to intersect the culture component, whether it's a company's culture, or an organization's culture, or the culture, your cultural heritage. It doesn't really matter. You have to figure out how to make this translation, if you will, between, sort of the logic and the meaning, the logic being more tech, that tech component, and then the culture being more the meaning of how it all comes together. And if you train these things, whether it's, I mean, we have it even in our iPhones or other
Sure.
devices, right? You have the ability to study dialects or translate things, whether it's, maybe it's not always, I'm not translating Java, but I would look at sort of other languages that I'm wanting to, unpack or navigate a little bit better based on travel or whatever else it is that I'm doing. But I think you really do, for success, the technology is often optimized when it's tied to values, right? And that sort of culture of values. And you see it in, we briefly mentioned that I like brand, and I do love brand.
Sure.
And you can see it in brands, right? Brands like, the top three that come to mind would be Nike, Unilever, maybe McDonald's, right? All of those brands, they also embrace like technology in their own way. And that was sort of the magic of like sports marketing for me, was that technology component, because technology can sometimes not have great visuals, but sports technology almost always has a great visual.
Right.
So, like, if you look at Nike, what have they done from a brand perspective and a technology perspective and a cultural perspective to bring all these things together? And I think they've done a pretty brilliant job, right? They're speaking in the voice of their advocates, and they're developing their product with technology in mind, and they're promoting it and building their brand through vehicles like AI. So that's probably they've created their own little ecosystem of culture through those advocates, and now they're amplifying it. So hopefully
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that, and that we do see this they're advocates in, I'll say, B2C type scenarios. I'm not sure if I see that in B2B marketing so much, and I don't know why, but do you observe that as well, or do I feel like a lot of B2B marketing is just sort of bland, and it's vanilla, and nobody wants to say anything that could potentially offend anybody about anything, and so we get this sort of like vanilla marketing. I don't know if you see that, and why is there a difference between B2B and B2C?
Yeah, you do see a lot of vanilla marketing, and a lot of, I think it could even be an instance, I don't know if I should say this, but it could be an instance where maybe we're so concerned about the data that we become a bit less concerned about the originality or taking some of those calculated risks. And it's really funny. I'll share this with you. I was having a conversation even this past weekend about some very risky things that some of the America's Cup sailors have done. And some stories were shared at this event I was at. And, at the end, you were almost grabbing your head, and people were saying, but why would he have taken or she have taken this risk? It seems crazy. You've got so much money on the line. This relates to all businesses that we work with, right? Like
Sure.
So much is on the line. Everything's always on the line. You're always under pressure. It's a pressure cooker situation. And I just looked over and said, well, generally you want athletes because they do take hopefully calculated risks, but they're risk takers. And that's what moves you forward. And that's what moves those vanilla brands forward. And sometimes it backfires. And it's, I'm not a proponent of all press is good press, but,
Right.
but I'm not, but I am a fan of taking some risks, breaking down some doorways and trying to fit yourself into the conversation as it makes sense. And in there lies that skill, right? It's always about so many brands get out there and they just talk about who they are, what they are. Here's my product, and they just amplify, 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 but they're not really listening or reading cues. And I think
Right.
that's where they become afraid as a brand, because maybe it's the wrong words, maybe they took too big of a risk. The options are limitless on that one.
Right.
But
Right.
but I do find if you hold course, if you're staying true to your core principles and brands, and you're not migrating too quickly from those concepts and asking AI to help you migrate those concepts, you actually stand to gain a lot, and probably risk less than you would have imagined.
Okay, that's actually a really, really interesting point. Maybe another question I had for you. There was everybody's trying to do more with less across the
Mhm.
board, so we want to scale everything. So, in this world of scaling, how do we keep storytelling, you know, uniquely human and maybe meaningful?
Right. Yeah, keeping it unique and human. Again, I kind of go back to that Nike example, but I will say that, to use the sports marketing parallel, oftentimes the uniqueness comes from the individual that is being oftentimes featured or is being allowed to have a bigger voice. And in the past, it was always very calculated. You had to kind of have everything well crafted, and there wasn't you didn't really want a lot of wiggle room. I think a lot of that's changed, and it's probably
Right,
changed, right, with all of the surge of technology and always on. And I think, honestly, like the pandemic made us all very comfortable, or more comfortable, with being on air at all times, right? And so
yeah,
I think the things that end up being top of mind for me is that, you have those expressions from our past, move fast and break things, right? To me, that's just I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I do think there's ways to be disruptive and to move forward, and create that path where you've got bigger recognition. In fact, I was listening to a news segment yesterday, right, with the
mhm,
AWS outage that took place, and actually, on the segment, Lisa Martin, who you also know, made a comment that totally resonated with me. And that comment is that, from an equity perspective, what do we value most? And I think her exact words were, trust is currency, and that's 100% right. So you kind of need
right,
a blend of trust, being in front of the story, whether or not it's positive. None of that is new, right? You always wanted to kind of bring that along. But then, what the missing piece often is, and I don't think they missed the mark on this from what I could tell, but it's aligning their principles with their culture, with their internal culture, to build both two big things, trust and adoption, because that is in fact the currency that businesses, I think, can truly benefit from. The differentiation, I would say, it comes from the personalities, the way you're using the technology, and is it actually, um, you know, used for not so much the better good, but for your competitive advantage tomorrow? And are you leading with a culture first playbook, whether it's because you're part of a cultural heritage organization or because your company culture is so valued? And, I think when you look at those, big case studies of who's done it right, you find that sort of, storytelling, to your original point, aligned with values, I think kind of gives you those metrics of like trust and relevance, memorability, and not and then that leads to share a voice, but it also leads to how you intertwine those things and make it a unified platform for you to grow your business on.
That's interesting. So I sort of agree with your point on one hand about this notion of trust, and that will help, I guess,
Yeah.
protect and amplify your brand, and help people distinguish between all the other vendors out there. But on the other hand, if we look at some of these generative AI companies that are out there,
Mhm.
they don't seem to care about anything. You find out, hey, well, we've scarfed up the internet. We don't care about IP rights. We're using your data to train on our stuff. And part of me says they don't even care about trust. It's like it's a power grab. I don't know if you're seeing if there's like a
Yeah.
distinction between these these companies that have maybe, I don't know if they're inflated or not, but these super high valuations, these generative AI companies, and maybe a more traditional brand like, Apple or McDonald's or Nike. Do you see a difference there?
I do see a difference, and it all comes down to one thing for me, which is memorability.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The power grab isn't, unless it gets to like some insane level, is not memorable. And it's usually memorable because it's kind of it's a little bit of an anomaly. It's probably not been done in quite the right way. It's all many times not sustainable, but okay, you can still get there and you can still have all of those things. I don't think that it gives you the same long game results, but
Mm-hmm.
if you're talking from the startup world perspective, your goals are different. So in
Right.
that instance, it really is. I know everybody. I mean, me, I'm so not cookie cutter, right? Like I think you have to take in all of those different touch points and signals, and then you have to look at them and bring them back, and then make a game time plan and assessment. And if you're just going to take the game plan that you had and you're going to try to square peg round hole the whole deal, it's probably going to be okay, but it's going to fit into your vanilla category and not into what I, often think is exceptional, which is your chocolate category. So,
Okay.
right, like, I mean, just to juxtapose it there, but it's going to be one of those. And I do think that what technology is helping us do, AI in particular, is fail fast. And while I'm not about breaking everything, although there's merits, right? We were just on a
Sure.
call, we were talking about breaking things and rebuilding them. I subscribe to that, but I'm not just about walking in and clearing. And I will seldom ever come into a situation where I walk in and I clear everything out and say, okay, now I'm going to do it my way. Because you know what? There's probably really good reasons why some of this has been done before. And you should at
Mm-hmm.
least understand before you move on, and do the clean sweep. So yeah, I think there's a lot of possibilities there for how it can be done. And if you don't take into consideration the size of the company, the purpose of the company, where their goals and objectives are, and you and I, have faced this, I think, on an ongoing basis with consultants, to be in consultancies, right? If you're not listening to what those business objectives are, probably not going to stick around very long.
Right. Yeah, that's just super interesting. I definitely see in the generative AI companies today. I think they've got a bunch of new commercials out there. They're like
Yeah.
human in nature. Hey, the art of the possible. We're going to better your life. So I think they're trying to win over some of
Yeah.
this negativity that has, and maybe introduce the tech to people that may not live and breathe it every day,
Right.
like you and I do. But I did think the first time I saw a generative AI commercial, Gina, I think it was Gemini, and it was just some lady. She was in some posh hotel somewhere, sitting in her bedroom, like talking to her phone. I'm like, hey Gemini, tell me. I'm like, how sad is that? You're in this beautiful place and
Right.
you're all alone talking to your phone. There's got to be a better way.
It's
I don't
true.
know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it struggles because on a commercial, having done advertising, you can't address all your audiences, right? So what are you going to do? And I think in that instance, you've got an opportunity to try to do something that gets their attention. And so they're leaning into sort of the luxury experience. It sounds like, oh, it's going to be all of these things, and they set the table with those little nodes so that you're drawn in. But I do find that if you, in any conversation, if somebody's interest has been piqued, let's use my dad for an example,
Mhm.
right? Like, not super techie, great in business, but he doesn't really, understand why we're using Chat GPT or other platforms or AI. Like, what does that mean to him? He's a lawyer, he's old school lawyer, but he's trying to figure it out because he does want to be in a contemporary mindset. And so when
Mhm.
you break it down and you say, you could do two things. You could say, okay, this is what AI is in this instance, or you could say, okay, do you know a little bit about AI, and do you want to know how it could relate to your business? Two
Right.
totally different conversations. One's a push, one's an engaging opportunity for him. So if the commercial has succeeded that you saw, it's because it was memorable and
Right.
it got your attention. Whether or not you liked it doesn't matter. What really matters is it doesn't because you've just recounted it to me. So it's somewhere in there, like all the other commercials you let go.
Right. Yeah. Well, I always felt bad for the person. I know she was just an
It was
actress.
pathetic. Yeah, it sounded
It
pathetic.
was. It's just, I want to be sitting there talking on my phone. But anyways, so given this discussion on, if we can have this concept of responsible innovation, what does that look like when you're balancing, these insane growth metrics from, the market, with community and trust? How do we balance these two things?
Yeah, I think responsibility comes down to really knowing your business, knowing your audience, and being authentic to it, and being authentic, I guess in this instance, kind of in me conjures up the idea of if we're using like a chat GPT. So I could put everything in there and say, okay, thanks, I appreciate that. That's going to be good. That's good enough. I'm going to take that.
Mhm.
What I think makes more sense is making sure that once I'm asking that question, I've actually provided and done sort of my due diligence to provide all the key things that I think actually need to be in there, because without those, it's going to be pretty hard to innovate, right? It's going to
Right.
be it's really going to be flat. It's not going to break much ground or new ground. And people, I mean, they're not really going to want to adopt the what you're trying to share with them. And so from a strategic point of view, it doesn't really last. I
Mhm.
think you have to
Sure.
look, it doesn't last. And so it could sound repetitive, but all of those things, we can do a lot of wonderful and extravagant things that are exciting and noteworthy. But at the end of the day, which ones do you remember? And the ones that you remember, if you're leading a business, are going to be the ones where you actually told your board what you were going to do. You stuck to those principles. You mapped out and evolved maybe your messaging and that connection that you had. And then you figured out ways to bring it to other audiences within your company and outside of your company, so that you actually grew in a way that you brought everybody along versus just throwing things against the wall. And
Yeah, yeah, that concept of, bringing everybody along, it really resonates with me in that, with today's technology, with generative AI, for example, you can be hyper specific without a lot of effort. You can tell it to behave and exercise some of the cultural norms for any culture you want. And for people that aren't techies, that might be more comfortable to them than some sort of robotic, back and forth that, maybe they're not used to. And so I do think that has great potential from that perspective, because you can personalize it to whatever cultural norm and set of behaviors that you want to. It's not that difficult.
right. And I think what it can also do, which is probably in many, at least in some of the examples that I see or ways that people are using it, it can actually help you connect the dots a lot faster, right? So you kind of can get that collective group or that herd, if you will, together moving forward quicker, because you can also vet out all the things that don't work. And you can, like I said, you can fail faster or you can succeed faster, right? You don't have to fail to be successful, but at least you know that you've tried a couple of different options and you're not just stagnating on what's always been done and how we're going to do it moving forward. You're open to the conversation, you're open to trying to find new ways to explore how you do what you do with a lens of whichever business you're trying to amplify.
Mhm. So I guess, maybe looking ahead, Gina, do you think that this technology is going to be remembered more as a disruptor of culture or an amplifier of culture?
I think it initially starts as a disruptor, and then
Okay.
so it disruption gets attention. So I think it's already achieved that. I think now it's an opportunity to be an amplifier when and once best practices have been vetted out. So I think it can wear both hats in this instance. And I think part of it is just the trajectory of the technology in its cycle of how it takes off with adoption.
Mhm.
Right? You have your early
Okay,
adopters, you know all that, right? Yeah, you've got
sure.
that. The early adopters are going to be the disruptors, and then as adoption kind of grows, it takes hold with more people, and then that bigger group of people potentially evangelizes the early adopters' point of view or thinking.
hmm And so I guess if you're a business leader or you're, in your capacity as the CEO of Adesso Associates advising, startups and very large companies for that matter, what's the one action that, leaders should take to help, build this into whatever system they're building this cultural, identity into it and not forgetting it.
Yeah, I think one idea would potentially be to look at your different operating units within your business and maybe give them the same assignment of, how would you accomplish these three things and have them work on that. And then from that, you kind of, you round robin it, right? Where you just keep getting tighter and tighter with your recommendations or the areas that you want to test so that you have the opportunity for them all to learn and engage along the way and with guardrails, right? That's what I was sort of implying, like you give them the same sort of test set and then you have them go down the path of doing it, because for me to tell you you should do this probably isn't going to necessarily be something you immediately think about when you go to start your project. However, if I give you guidance on how I would recommend you approach it, you're more likely then to take ownership of it as opposed to anything else. So same thing,
Sure.
real estate, right? You go into a new home, you're looking at it. All the walls are painted white. Why are they painted white? Because you need to envision yourself in that room with all of your
Sure.
things. It's the same exact concept, only apply it to the tech world that we live in. If you take these cultural pieces and let each organization, for as different as they are, define what it is that's important to them, how to use it, why it ties to business values, you'd most likely get some really good thinking that isn't forcing them to do the norm, but actually taking into consideration how they would want to see it grow. And now they're actually out there talking about what they did, how they did it, and why it was important to them, to a whole new audience of people who may know nothing about it outside of the company even.
Right. Yeah. And all the studies I've read, was under the guise of diversity, whether that be demographic,
Mhm.
socioeconomic, or
Right.
cultural, or what have you. You get a better outcome when you have a diverse group of people
You do.
together, for sure. The issue I think some businesses struggle with is it just takes longer.
It
Because if
does take.
everybody's like nodding their head yes, that's not a diverse team in whatever characteristic you want to use, and it's probably a suboptimal result. Would you sort of agree to
I
that?
completely agree with that. In fact, I think some of the roles that I've taken on in the working world have been the most impactful because I applied from outside of that realm. So in other words, if I wasn't thinking like everybody else was thinking,
Right.
because my lens was very different. And yet that also didn't give me a lot of allies in the room necessarily,
Mhm.
but it gave me the opportunity to share a different perspective, and one that came to be kind of provocative. And I think that's where the win is. And in this specific example I'm thinking of right now, it was in the America's Cup.
Mhm.
I never had my sights set on being part of that world, even though I certainly appreciated it. And
Right.
I was a techie, I was in the world of trying to make the complicated consumable to
Mhm.
a broader public. And so sometimes when you see those moments and you seize them for some unknown reason, it can lead to really interesting things. So I came into this world not from an America's Cup sailing background. And I just asked this question as to why did you hire me when
Right.
you didn't have to? There were so many people just waiting to have that role. And the answer was you saw things differently. You were going to do things differently. Maybe some of those things weren't going to work, but they were certainly going to be interesting to try to entertain. And things that we did were at the time quite disruptive, but very for that world. But from where I
Right.
came from in the tech world, it's just what we did.
Sure.
So that example of diversity, of diverse thinking, and diverse business practices, um,
Right.
led to things that I'm super proud to say are still in existence today. And that's 25 plus years later. And it's maybe just because it came down to storytelling, right? And it came down to listening and looking at like social economic impact reports, things that we all kind of try to
Right.
gauge. But when you take all these things in aggregate, you can actually do some pretty cool things. And diversity of thought has definitely been a key for me in a lot of the work that I've done.
That's amazing, Gina. Well, we're getting near the end of our time, and this is a super interesting topic for me. What's the one message that you want the listeners of this, or the watchers, the viewers of this, to sort of walk away with as they're thinking about their next moves in the business world?
I would say the one really big thing to walk away from is that you have the opportunity to really create and build things, and technology is really there, I think, and can be a way for you to really explore more, do more, and find that it can tie and bring new ideas into your world you might not have thought before, not because it's going to give that all to you, but because you can guide it and train it and teach
Mhm.
it to think similarly, so that when you start your process, you've already shortcutted a lot of the things that might have taken you longer. It can propel you, it can propel your team. And if you're prudent and including culture, however that interprets in your business, you'll definitely have that different perspective that you were hitting on earlier in our conversation. So
Well, that's amazing. I think people will take that to heart. And I guess maybe one final quick question. Got to
yes.
tie this back to bowl liquor. What is your favorite meal, Gina?
Meal or recipe?
Recipe.
Okay. Would probably be hmm, um, mushroom pasta.
All right, mushroom pasta. You heard it here. So go
Mushroom
look up
ragu.
Gina's blog, check out her book, and where can I find you, you and Adesso, if people have questions and want to follow up?
Yeah. So it's www at adessoassoc.com. You can find me
All
there,
right.
and you can find me on LinkedIn pretty easily.
All right. Well, awesome. Gina, thank you for the delightful
Thank
conversation.
you.
Appreciate you having here, and look forward to the next one. Talk to you later.
You too.
Cheers. Bye.